Hi everyone, welcome to the final part of my procedural donut series. It's time to add final details to our procedural donut, as well as creating some final, better looking materials to create a nice final render. In terms of the geometry nodes improvement, I want to add two things. First, if you look at the sprinkles and how it interact with the icing, it just looks like there's no interaction, no change in the curvature of the icing. There's no tension. I would like to add some of this effect to the icing. The second improvement would be adding some particles to the dough to make it a little bit more realistic. It would be a nice recap of instancing. So, without further ado, let's jump into geometry nodes. Let's work first on the improvements for icing. As I said before, I want to add some tension. For that, we for sure need icing geometry and sprinkles. So, let's create some reroute node to keep our geometry nodes network clean. Great. So the idea for this system is rather simple. First, we need to create a selection attribute that will select the areas near sprinkles, and then, based on that selection, we'll offset icing geometry in the normal direction. The last part will be just some smoothing to make this effect more organic and natural. For the selection, I will use the geometry proximity node. It is an extremely useful node that allows us to check proximity/distance between different geometries, which is perfect for our use case. Let's plug it to our sprinkles. Because sprinkles are our target, we want to use a selection attribute on the icing geometry. Let's now preview the distance output with the Ctrl-Shift shortcut. As you can see, it's pretty dark noise texture. The darker the color, the closer this area of the icing is to the individual sprinkle. So now we need some sort of a threshold. For that, the less than node will be perfect. Let's drag and drop from the distance output and search for the less than node. Now let's adjust the threshold manually. I will type something around 0.001. I know, pretty specific. Perfect. That should be good. So, we have our selection field. Now it's time to create the offset in the normal direction. So as you remember, the normal direction is the vector that is perpendicular to the surface. That's why we want to use it. Because what I want to do is basically inflate our icing, but only in specific parts. It's the same action like Alt-S shortcut in the edit mode. So, let's add a position node to our icing geometry. Now we need to specify the offset. For that, we will use the normal node for sure. And to control the strength of it, I will add a vector math scale node, which is basically one number multiplier for the vector. Because of how small this number needs to be, I will also add the classic math multiply node and set it to 0.01. I will set the other value to 0.05. Let's plug this now to our offset input in the set position node. Okay, the whole donut's icing is inflated now, but we plug the selection from the less than node. Great, it works as expected. So, we can now see that the offset is being applied only where there are sprinkles, which is exactly what we wanted. Great. The effect now is a little bit blocky. Let's add our smooth node group to make it look more organic. Adjust the number of iterations and great. This would be our final icing geometry. Let's preview the whole donut now. As you can see, this icing tension is a really nice addition to the overall look of the donut. It is a really small detail, but it was really fun to make individually with so few nodes. So, The last part that we will do with geometry nodes in this series is the addition of particles on the dough. So, this will be rather simple, nothing new here, just a quick recap. This is the final result. As you can see, we had to distribute many points on the dough geometry and then place small icospheres instances on them. To create more random results, I use noise texture to randomize the point distribution density, and after that I randomize instances itself by randomizing the scale differently in different directions, and then I also randomize the rotation. So pretty simple. If you want, you can try to recreate this last element by yourself. Pause the video and try to make those particles. I will show you my solution after a few seconds. So, first of all, we need our dough geometry. Then, we create the distribute points on faces node. To make distribution more uneven, I will use the noise texture. Let's change the scale to 30 and plug our offset coordinates group and main seed. Then, let's adjust the contrast of the noise with the color ramp node. I will use the viewer node to preview the colors on the donut geometry and adjust the color ramp a little bit. I will change the mode of the distribute points on faces node to Poisson disk and plug our color ramp as a factor. Now we need to adjust some settings to actually see some points. You can see the results before and after. The next step is to add an instance on point node, and as an instance I will use a simple icosphere with a really tiny radius. Now it's time for randomization. Let's add scale instances and rotate instances node. Plug them in. Now, for both the rotation and scale, I will use a random value, vector type, node. We can play with those values a little bit. And that's great. Now we have pretty random results. We can plug those random values nodes to the main seed. The last thing is to set a new dough particles material. And same as for sprinkles, store the random ID attribute that we can use inside our material network. For the ID input of the random value node, I will plug the ID node, because these are still instances, so each one has a single value ID. Now it's time to finally join everything together. Perfect. That's it. You made it. This is our final geometry. We can use one last bake node at the end to make sure that we didn't need to wait for any calculations. So, now it's time to make a little order here and there. I'll put everything in the correct frames and name them and add some colors. The most important part is the inputs. Some elements like radius of the donut, seed, etc. are really important and would be nice to be able to control them outside the geometry nodes network. So, I want to create new group inputs and name them correctly. To keep some order, I also create panels that allows me to keep better order under my modifier panel. If you want to learn more about creating nice geometry based modifiers, check out my other video exactly about that. So, now it's time to work a little bit on materials. We have 4 of them: icing, sprinkles, dough and dough particles. Let's start with the icing material. Currently it's just a pink Principle BSDF. Let's add some noise texture. I will use Ctrl+T shortcut to add some UV mapping. Let's adjust the noise scale now. And now I will use a color ramp to better control the colors. This noise can now be used as our roughness. This will add nice extra tiny detail. To make it even better, we can duplicate the noise, change the scale and use it for the bump node input. Let's plug this to the normal input of the Principle BSDF, and that's one more nice detail. One more thing that we can do, and this will significantly improve the look of the icing, is subsurface scattering. Let's increase the weight of it under the subsurface panel. Great. We can adjust the main color a little bit now. Let's go to the next material, the sprinkles. We already had the color randomization, so the only thing that we would like to add is the noise texture for the roughness. We can just copy it from the icing material and adjust the noise scale a little bit. Also, adjust the color ramp. Now, let's work on the dough material. First, I will change the colors of the dough in the color ramp a little bit. Now, let's enable the subsurface scattering option too by changing the weight value. Much better. The next step will be to add some bumps. For that, we can again copy the nodes from the icing material. Let's plug them and adjust the noise scale and bump distance. Let's add another noise texture. I'll use the greater than node to select these big chunks of the dough and use this as the wake of the coat to add nice sugar spots. To make this effect even better, I will add another Principal BSDF node and use it as my sugar material. Let's change the color to slightly more like dough. Now let's decrease the roughness and add same coating. I will also create a new noise texture for the bump effect. Now we can mix between this and this material with the use of the Mix Shader node. As the mask input, I will use the output from the greater than node from here. To have better control, I will add Math Multiply node and decrease it a lot. So, this is the final dough material. Now it's time for the dough particles. For them, I'll use the same color ramp as for the dough, to make sure the colors are similar. Then I will randomize the color a tiny bit with the random ID node and hue saturation value. It will be a really subtle change. Great. So, that's it. This is our final donut. Now let's just add a plain mesh as a ground, some wood texture, place the camera and press the render button. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked the series and learned something new about the Blender and the geometry node system. Geometry nodes are a really powerful element of Blender and I hope that you will use them in your future project. If you have any ideas for the future tutorials, write them in the comments. I will gladly look at them. If you want to support my channel, you can check out my Blender add-ons and assets pack, link in the description. I recently published geometry-based furniture assets that are using the new gizmo feature from the Blender 4.3 release. Thanks again for watching, see you again soon, and bye!